colonization of good bacteria in your gut. So if they are eating unhealthy foods, this helps mitigate some of that low fiber, unhealthy, and therefore keeps your bacteria healthy. And why? Because cranberries are found to have what is a bile acids and also impacting short-chain fatty acids in the gastrointestinal tract. And they also have anti-carcinogenic effects. So they're really good. And from the Calico Life Sciences, published in the peer-reviewed journal Genetics, genetics has less impact on lifestyle than once believed. We've been saying this the whole time. And the reason I can say it with some sense of authority is because I remember two sisters. They were in their 20s, and this goes back to about 1985, more or less. They looked completely healthy, but they had tested for the genes that predict breast cancer. Therefore, their doctors had suggested radical mastectomies preventatively. And they wanted another input, and so I said, let's just say that it's correct. You do have a gene that predicts cancer, but the science does not actually support that. And I showed them the challenge to that science. But I said, but let's say they're right. They're assuming, because of their monolithic brains, single thoughts, nothing else matters, nothing else counts. Boy, have I seen that a million times. That it doesn't matter what you eat or drink or how you feel or where you work or where you live or what your environmental influences are or your conditioning. None of that pays any power to the outcome. But what if it did? Wouldn't it be better to make some changes that protect you from the genetic consequence if it can be proven the genetic consequence is absolute? They said, yeah. So we started a 1-year program. For 1 year, every single day, they did everything that I could possibly encourage them to do that would change the underlying genetic consequence. At the end of a year, they tested absolutely healthy, and those biomarkers no longer showed any potential for cancer. So we can change genetic predisposition in many, many conditions. So now they're saying this in genetics, and, quote, Graham Ruby of Calico Life Sciences and colleagues, which concludes that estimates of the heritability of longevity in humans, quote, are substantially inflated. Heritability is a measure of how much of variation in a trait can be explained by genetic differences as opposed to lifestyle and other factors. We can potentially learn many things about the biology of aging from human genetics, but if the heritability of lifespan is low, it tempers our expectations about what types of things we can learn and how easy it will be. It helps contextualize the questions that scientists studying aging can effectively ask. Okay, they looked at 400 million people in a database, online genealogy, ancestry, to determine this. Here is what they're finally intimating. Everything you do will impact your genes, constructively or destructively. Just look at the people in your graduating class from high school or college, if you've been living a healthy life and they have not. So that's one way that you can look at it. If you have done everything possible or reasonable to impact in a good way your genes, you should have a good gene profile today. And your genes should then have had you looking younger, stronger, more vital, more energy than those who did not. And you can actually take, well, it's in the family, it's in the gene pool, so, what am I expecting? And you can actually then speed up the genetic consequences by doing negative things. So do not believe when people say, well, it's in your genes. Yeah? So there's a lot of stuff you don't know, and I'm still here, and that's what you tell them. And by the way, finally, from Dianuso University in Italy, they've just come up with a study that shows that 95% a plaque buildup, which is deadly for your heart, it's the number one cause of death in the nation, can be mitigated, lowered with pine bark and Gotu kola. Gotu, G-O-T-U, kola, K-O-L-A. And pine bark is also known as pycnogenol. How about that? And I know a lot of you have been using these rich in proanthocyanidins, bioflavonoids, phenolic acids, and the French pine bark extract reduces the expression of pro-inflammatory cytokines that trigger inflammation and plaque formation. Therefore, take your Gotu kola and take your pine bark and help inhibit the formation of plaque, which reduces the adhesion of the cells that contribute to atherosclerosis. I'm Gary Null. That's the latest in health and healing. We're going to take a brief break. We're 22 minutes into our program. Come back, and we're going to go right into George Carlin answering. No, I'm going to hold that. Hold that. I'm going to come back, and we're going to take a look at part 2 of my critique on the environment, where we're at, where we're going, and why we should rethink everything. Back in a moment.
a shame the way you hurt me. It's a shame the way you mess around with your man.
Nice to have you with us, everyone. I'm Gary Null. I want to mention that there are a lot of things happening around the world that I'm very concerned about. This is just one, and I want to share this with you because this is nowhere else in the media. This is from Climate News, from Alex Kirby. It says, a group of British scientists and their supporters are willing to risk a prison term to press governments to tackle climate change and environmental crisis. It says a growing number of British academics, writers, and activists say they are ready to go to prison in support of their demands for action on the environment. Scientists are not normally renowned for their political activism, and the United Kingdom is hardly a hotbed of determined and risky protests against its rulers. But if this group of nearly 100 British scientists and their backers is right, all that may be on the brink of changing. Today sees the launch of the Extinction Rebellion, which describes itself as an international movement using mass civil disobedience to force governments to enter World War II level mobilization mode in response to climate breakdown and ecological crisis. The group is launching a declaration of rebellion against the United Kingdom's government, quote, for criminal inaction in the face of climate change catastrophe and ecological collapse at the House of Parliament in central London. And from today, it promises repeated acts of disruptive, non-violent civil disobedience if the government does not respond seriously to its demands, and says there will be mass arrest. Now is the time because we are out of time. There is nothing left to lose. Good for them. I commend them. That takes a great deal of courage to stand up, especially to a government that never listens to its people, that has its own political agenda, as does the United States. And yesterday I began a two-part series called Global Warming, We're Screwed, and then subtitled The Optimists and Utopians, The Pragmatist, The Pessimist, and The Nihilist. Each one of these groups has its own perspective. And I specifically addressed David Corton, who does a good job over at Yes Magazine, in discussing how modern civilization's power to wake up and make critical changes is necessary to either lessen the impact of climate change or reverse its course. Now, Corton is not alone. There are others as well. And all of these other people are saying we need a Marshall Plan to save the planet. Nothing less will do. I agree. We do need a Marshall Plan. I also agree that it's a noble gesture. And I fully support it. And what happens is if we don't agree, then we reduce ourselves to apathy, indifference, and fear that climate change instills in billions of people who are experiencing environmental catastrophes. So you have Michael Mann, Bill McKibben, and many others who want to see change. On the other hand, there is a growing faction of people whose awareness has expanded. And I mentioned that people are living off the grid now. They are finding environmental communities. They're finding how to do things they never thought they would have to do, learning new ways, like there's Paul Beckwith, Kevin Hester, Guy McPherson, Natalia Shakova. And these are people who are saying, we're going elsewhere. When the time comes, we'll be relocated. And that brings me to the idea that I believe that we will be seeing the largest immigration or migration in the United States' history because of the environment. Primarily it will be around the coast and I'm including Canada and of course Vancouver, beautiful city, but it's going to get creamed. And then Washington State and Oregon and California, all of California. And then continue around the whole Gulf Coast, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida. And Florida's going to have a double negative, both hurricanes, flooding, toxic tides, because the largest lake in the state, Lake Okeechobee, is getting so much rainfall, and it's all toxic from the pesticides, that it has to open the gates and allow it to go to the east coast, up around Port St. Lucie, and on the west coast, or Juniper, and then on the west coast over up near north of Fort Lauderdale. But then it migrates up and down the whole coast. Now, right now as I speak, the entire coast is just completely saturated with green algae and then red algae and toxic water and no oxygen in the water and millions of fish and thousands of mammals are dying. So you go clear up the east coast of the United States. These are the areas that are most susceptible. Then you go the interior, where you have Colorado, Kansas, Illinois, South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, Nevada, New Mexico. These are also non-sustainable for the future. So we now have a dilemma. Our dilemma is, are we willing to risk personal change in our lifestyle, our buying habits, changing our capitalist model of continuous growth as the only metric of how we're progressing? Oh, we have 3.5 to 4.1 gross domestic growth in the last in the consumer index in the last 2 quarters. That's good. Not for the planet. It means more things are being sold, more people are using things. Many of those things they're using, more of their stuff is simply finite in resources. And then you have the people who are simply indifferent. If it's not happening to them, they're not going to make it an issue. And here is the dilemma of achieving and adhering to irrationally idealistic attitudes. It is my belief that the majority of private industries that fuel economic growth depend upon and are powered by the very same fossil fuel addiction that drives climate change. We are therefore forced to demand that all of the largest polluters change their entire paradigm of business as usual and invest in long-term sustainability immediately. And because no one is going to do that, not a single industry, and no politician that's received